This is episode number 4 of the Vires and Numeris podcast. Tonight, I'm very honored. I have Professor of Economics at Duquesne University and distinguished Milton Friedman, distinguished Milton Friedman Fellow on the program. His name is Professor Antony Davies. I appreciate your time, taking your time out of your night and your busy schedule to come on tonight, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I like to get into people's background right off the bat. Everybody has an interesting story, and it's good to find out, how people started their life. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in north central Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere. Actually, Montoursville, which is the home of the Little League World Series.
Okay. Is that Williamsport, or is that?
I didn't know it was a thing until after I left Montoursville and saw it on the news.
Okay. I remember watching that growing up. It got pretty big on ESPN and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of student were you growing up? Were you a good student? It seems like you probably were.
Yeah, I spent all my time either doing, studying, being a student, and the rest of my time, my whole family was involved in theater. So, it was one or the other, and that was it. That's my 24-hour day.
Oh, okay. And
it was kind of nice. It was there I discovered the secret to being productive is don't have too much free time.
Oh yeah, that's the number one thing. No idle time. Stay moving.
Right.
Body in motion stays in motion. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when did you get interested in economics and start looking into economic theory?
I laugh because I was always interested in mathematics. It was like a hobby of mine. I just loved it, right? And I talked about being an astrophysicist, and this was at the point in history when astrophysicists were just not employable. And my mother was petrified that I'd go into that. And she said, "Why don't you study economics?" And I said, "Well, what's economics?" And she said, "Just go try it. You'll like it."
That's awesome.
So I did, and it ended up being, it was an outlet for my mathematics, and also quite fascinating unto itself.
Yeah, mothers have a way of kind of knowing where their child should go. My mom kind of led me into English, but learning to write, and then I got interested in economics sort of from that, reading my favorite authors and stuff. So I was curious about your background. So when did you want to tell everyone where you went to university? I know you went to Albany for your
I did my undergraduate at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and my PhD at the State University of New York at Albany.
I actually met somebody the other night in Pittsburgh that knew you from St. Vincent.
Oh, really?
Maybe your children went there as well. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'll talk to you about that after we're done. But yeah, I met somebody that knew you. And what sort of books did you start reading off the bat when you got into economics? Do you remember?
I never read economics for fun. I've kind of developed my public persona doing kind of the Austrian thing, right? The Mises and Hayek and all of that. I hadn't studied any of those. I came up in a traditional econ program. You call it the Chicago School. So I was past my PhD before I ever figured out who Mises and Hayek were. So it's not the sort of thing, the traditional Chicago School economics is not the sort of thing you read for fun, right? For fun, I was science fiction.
Oh, okay. Yeah, a lot of, I'm into blockchain a lot. I want to ask you about that in a little bit. And a lot of those guys are, the libertarian cypherpunks were sci-fi guys as well. So it's interesting. Yeah, we're getting into your software stuff in a little bit. So that's interesting too. Your Wikipedia describes you both as a neoclassical. I know I'm talking to a professor, and this isn't always where you want to get your information, but it describes you as a neoclassical and Austrian economist. So can you tell everyone that doesn't know what the difference is between the two schools?
Well, the neoclassical, I don't know. I don't know what people mean by neoclassical. I say Chicago School, right?
Okay.
Which means think of Milton Friedman.
Right.
So someone who's basically a free market orientation, but with all of the mathematical modeling in the background that Austrians don't mess with.
Right.
Austrians approach from a philosophical perspective principally. And when I encountered my first Austrians, which was probably 10 years after I finished my PhD, I was having deep conversations with them, and I'm seeing them come to the same conclusions I had come to. But whereas I used mathematics, they used philosophy and reason. I thought, wow, there must be something fundamentally true about the conclusion that you can reach it from these two disparate perspectives.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So from that point forward, I call myself an adopted Austrian now. I have a foot in both camps.
I love the Austrian school. I'm one of those people that do read it for leisure, and I like to listen to a good Austrian lecture on YouTube or something. So that's another reason to talk to you tonight. What do you teach right now at Duquesne?
I always, everybody teaches some principles classes. I do that. I teach the advanced econometrics, which is our students take 4 semesters of statistics. Statistics 1, 2, econometrics, advanced econometrics, and some MBA stuff. And generally that's it. I do a lot of people in our department don't like to do online classes. I love to do online classes, and so consequently I get most of them. So for example, this semester I only have one class that's physically in front of me. The rest of them are all online.
That's pretty cool. And what is this? So I'm sure this kind of changes my next question. The follow-up is, what's the most challenging thing to teach, get kids interested in economics today? Is it easier or harder, do you think, doing it in a virtual? What's the difference between the virtual and physical setting?
Oh, I hate the virtual. I think it's an excellent learning environment for people who are highly self-motivated, right? So if you're the kind of person, you would study this on your own anyway, an online course is perfect for you. If you're the kind of person that you need the professor pushing a little bit, this is a horrible mistake. I don't like it. Now I have it, it's designed, the information is the same kind of thing that I teach in the person-to-person, but I miss the personal interaction, right? So, I have 2 MBA classes that are both kind of surveys of economic stuff. The in-class one is wonderful discussion back and forth and debates, this kind of thing. The online, same material is like crickets. You don't hear anything.
Right, and you can learn things from other people's opinions, as you obviously know.
Oh, tremendous amount. Yeah.
Having that dialogue is good. Do you think today millennials are interested in economic theory? Like you have or do you have to kind of get them interested? You see a lot of people that start to get more interested when you get a hold of them in class or online.
It varies, They seem to be interested in things that are going on around them. So when I approach economics from the perspective of here's what candidates are saying, and this is why what they're saying is right or what they're saying is wrong or for the implications, that they like. But to say, the relationship between demand and supply looks like this, and you get an equilibrium, they're not interested in that.
Right.
I'm generalizing.
Yeah, they don't want to do the models and all the math and whatnot, right?
No, and I can see it because they want to hook it on to something that hits them viscerally, that they're interested in. And I think it's perfectly fine. The problem is the textbooks aren't written that way. The textbooks are written to present all of the theory, and maybe at the end of the chapter you'll see a couple of applications.
Right.
That's got to change.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of it like that. You mentioned Milton Friedman, and I know we talked about him. Have you read his son a lot? Have you read any of his son's books? Or he seems to be a little bit different than his father in his philosophy. Very close, but a little different.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I've met David a couple of times, and he's a fascinating guy. He's into, I forget the name of it, but what is the thing where you simulate like a medieval village?
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Almost like Renaissance, but the more serious thing. Yeah, and he does, he I guess his role in these events is telling stories, telling history. Okay. And so we sat for a long time, and I want to say we didn't talk. He talked, I listened, about the history of law and economics. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I'm not as big of a Friedmanite or whatever Friedman guy. I like Milton Friedman, but I've listened to some of what David Friedman had to say too, and I think he's interesting. So, have you ever seen the clip of Milton Friedman predicting Bitcoin?
No,
there's actually a clip on YouTube. I think it's from the 90s or 80s, and he actually talks about a digital accounting ledger. Almost predicted it pretty. It's pretty amazing what he predicted. So
I thought I'd seen all of the Friedman videos. This is great. I got to go find this one.
Yeah,
now.
I'll send it to you when we get off of here. I'm pretty sure that was Friedman. So, are there any other Austrian-leaning professors at Duquesne?
There are a couple who were educated kind of like I was in the more traditional Chicago school, but have also adopted, some of the Austrian stuff. Largely, I'm going to paint with a broad brush here, but largely economists, pretty much anywhere you go, are some variation of free market. And many of them might not say that, but if you start poking at them, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Generally speaking, they look and act and quack like free market economists, right? It's just the way when you study the thing, that's the direction it tends to point.
I understand that. This question is a little different. I know you're Catholic, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what do you think that had an impact on your decision to get into economics and like understanding the natural law and stuff like that? The individual is greater than the state, sort of thing. Do you have any thoughts on that sort of idea?
Yeah, no. The answer there is no. In fact, if anything, it was the other direction, because I like many young people who are first encountering economics, perceived that economics was about making profits. It was about business, right? And that's in that, at a gut level, you think, well, that's kind of antithetical to the idea of living in community and sharing, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't until much later, actually, after I start messing with the Austrians, that I realized, no, that's not what economics is about. Economics is about human behavior, how humans come together to solve problems given their various limitations. And whether one is selfish or altruistic has nothing to do with the economic system. It has to do with the person, right? The economic system is simply the environment in which your selfishness or altruism plays out.
So this is the idea that we're all greedy. It's subjective. What is greed? It's on a different level, right? Yeah.
We're all self-interested. Now, my self-interest may solely be a function of me, and people would call that greed, or my self-interest may also largely be a function of other people, and we call that altruism.
Yeah, you hear greed a lot today, so that's good. I'm glad you explained that perfectly. The State of the Union is tonight, I believe. And,
oh my God, I forgot all about it.
Yeah,
right.
I don't follow along in the politics, but I look at it from an economics point. I don't watch any of the stuff anymore. I'm completely out of that scene. I'm an Austrian anarcho-capitalist guy, but I'd be remiss if I had you on and I didn't ask you about the debt. That's one of the most important things we could talk about. And I came across I was at a family gathering. I was at my parents' house last month, and I was waiting for dinner. And I watched one of your speeches, a lecture you'd recently given. I think it was within the last 12 months, and you were talking about how the nominal debt's like 23 trillion right now.
Right.
It's actually closer to over $150 trillion if you include all the things they don't include to make it look small. What do you think what is the end game here? Is it a race to the bottom of the monetary ranks, or what is the end game?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it plays out as follows. I don't know which of these are going to come first. In fact, they'll probably come kind of together. One is application of means testing on Social Security, which means that at some point politicians are going to say, okay, this idea of everybody getting Social Security is now off the table. You're going to get or not get Social Security based on how much you've saved in your 401ks, your IRAs, how much your income is, something like that. So they're going to start to pull back Social Security. And one of the things to watch for, I guarantee you, some politician's going to say this at some point within the next 10 years. They're going to say something like, Social Security was never designed for everybody. It was designed for the poor. And those of you who are fortunate enough to have employers who contribute to 401k plans, well, it's time for you to give back. And why should you give back? Well, the reason you got those jobs that contribute into your 401k is because you got college educations. Right. And you've got those educations because the federal government subsidized your loans. And now you're going to give back. You're going to give back in the form of reduced Social Security benefits. I guarantee you that. Now, that sounds like, oh, we're looking to do what's right. What they're really doing is defaulting on Social Security obligations, right? It's a default. So
that's really interesting. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's one of the things that's going to happen. The other thing that's going to happen, kind of simultaneous with it, is monetization. And you start to see this already with this rise of MMT, modern monetary theory. When you boil down modern monetary theory to its bare bones, what it really is printing money. We're going to print money to pay our bills. And even non-economists understand at a gut level what happens here. You get inflation. So when we print money to pay our bills, what we're really doing is stealing purchasing power of other people's dollars.
Right. And exporting the debt to the people that have those IOUs, right?
That's right.
So I actually took an audience question as well. I put it on my Facebook, my social media today. And this guy named Raffle asked, how low do you think the interest rates can go? And is there any real objective limitation for negative interest rates in our current economic system?
Yeah, well, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to how low can they go. But in Europe, they already have negative interest rates. Right. Are we going to see negative interest rates here? I don't know. I can't get my head around them well enough. There's got to be some. I can't see negative interest rates going hard negative like they can go hard positive. I can see them going a little bit negative. But beyond that, weird things happen because you get into a space where you're better off just keeping your money in cash. Why would you why would you borrow a certain amount of money and pay back less of it, right? Right. It starts not to make sense. So I don't know the answer to that.
Do you think that you kind of talked about the average person that doesn't have an like the layman in economics, they don't have solid, they might not have studied a lot of economics. Them sort of understanding that the printing isn't really good, obviously. Do you think this is the reason you see a lot of people today with very little saved? Do you think they realize that they might as well spend that money immediately? Or do you think that just happens to be the society we live in today?
Well, the savings rate isn't as low as what politicians make it out to be.
Okay.
But it is lower than it would be otherwise. And what do I mean by that? Well, the Federal Reserve has been holding interest rates artificially low for going on 15, 20 years now. So if you hold interest rates low, you're taking away the incentive to save. So that's not to say people aren't saving, but they're saving less than they would otherwise.
I know the dollar's lost, a lot of people say upwards of 90-something% over the last century, so that's something I was interested in. If you're a younger person and you plan on saving money, it doesn't make sense to actually put it in something like land, maybe not a house that depreciates, but do you think that would be good to put it in land or something, a hard asset like that?
Yeah, I don't know. You're asking investment advice question, which I'm not competent to answer.
Okay.
I can tell you by the numbers that the stock market seems to be doing well. Yeah, it has its ups and downs, but on average, it's at the same time the interest rates have been remarkably low. The stock market return has been pretty good. Right. What's going to happen in the future? I don't know. There's lots of people who say things like you should invest in land and gold, and as far as that's concerned, you and I are on equal footing there as far as what the advice should be. Okay. I don't know.
Yeah, I had to ask that question. as far as the United States picture, I mean, like you mentioned, a lot of European nations, their central banks have negative rates. Do you see or envision a world, or in the future? I don't know how long it would take, but the United States loses its reserve dollar status.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. Once upon a time, the pound sterling was the world currency. And at the time, at the height of the British Empire, if you had asked, will there ever be a time when the pound sterling isn't the world reserve? People would laugh at you, right? But now we have the dollar.
Right.
What's coming next? I don't know. One possibility, and it's just a possibility, China has a massive economy. Now, it's roughly speaking around the size of the U.S., give or take, but it's around the size of the U.S., given that they have 3 times the number of people. So it's as if it's this massive economic juggernaut that's missing half of its spark plugs. And the missing spark plugs is the lack of market freedoms there. China has been instituting over decades now more and more market freedoms. As it does that, it's putting spark plugs back into the engine. And once they all get in, China is going to be the economic engine of the planet. And so at that point, I would not at all be surprised that the Chinese currency becomes the world reserve.
Right.
Now, what we're talking about here is probably, if it comes to pass, it's probably 50 years down the road plus.
Okay. Shifting lanes a little bit here, more into your the history of what you've done. You co-founded Paragon Software, and that was a video game developer. It was a video game company, and you guys worked with some pretty big people. You had you developed games that were licensed by Marvel Comics, which was pretty cool. Yeah,
I have to put a big footnote there. So the story is, my friend Mark Ceremet and I, when we were sophomores in college, encountered the problem many sophomores in college do, that we wanted to buy beer and we had no money. But we were both coders. So we decided, let's start coding for businesses and we'll get money and we can buy beer. So we started. We were actually doing business software. And the product life cycle is so long on the business software that we're running out of money. So we said, okay, let's do some games on the side, because the product cycle was much smaller for games. Do some games just to make some money. So I continued with the business software. My friend Mark started up with the games, and the games we abandoned the business software. The games were the things that paid. But by the time those things came online, by the time they were doing the Marvel Comics, I had left the company to go to graduate school. Mark stayed with it. It sold it, repurchased it, and anyway, he and I are still now very good friends. He's still doing some online something.
That's pretty cool. You started something that was successful like that while you were still sophomore.
That was fun. Yeah, it was fun.
I mean, that's really neat. Are there any parallels between what you did with them and economics, like what you do today?
Not really. Not really. It's very. The two things, business and economics, are at opposite ends of a spectrum. With the business, you're down in the weeds, dealing with day-to-day stuff and buying and selling and contracts and this. In economics, you're at 10,000 feet, taking a high view of the whole economy. So it's two very different vantage points.
What would be one thing that you learned while you were doing that in the software business that you took with you, though?
I would say probably the thing that stands out there, and then I went to academia and then left to go back into industry and went back into academia. So both of my forays into industry, the same thing jumps out at me, which is that people in business they're not heartless people like politicians will present them. They're regular, nice people just like you, just like me, right? What they're trying to do, yes, they're trying to make a buck, but the way they're trying to make it is by looking around and asking how they can serve other people. And they're moving very quickly doing it, right? So they'll spend, I'll spend a week studying this thing. If this isn't good enough, people don't want it, I'm going to bin it, I'm going to do something else, because every tick of the clock is another dollar that I'm spending. So these people are hyper-focused on thinking about others, making other people's lives better, which is vastly different than what you get in academia, right? In academia, we're all in our heads, we're thinking about us, and we move at a snail's pace, right? It's the polar opposite.
And I did get a lot of rhetoric in my academic, along the way from professors that, the capitalist is, that greedy, gimme guy, and like you just described it, it's the complete opposite. They're really the best benefactors of society.
I guarantee you, any professor who says that is a professor who has never actually worked in the private sector.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with you. So this is the Vires and Numeris podcast. This is I want to talk to economists and people that are into blockchain and stuff. So I have to ask you these questions. I know you didn't want to give any financial or advice on property or anything like that, but what you and I have had one conversation at least about cryptocurrencies. Do you believe that Bitcoin or something like Bitcoin could be a tool to free markets across the world?
Yeah, I think very much so. My belief is that cryptocurrency becomes the world currency. I don't necessarily think that national currencies will go away, but in the background there will be cryptocurrency. Whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, or something that hasn't even been invented yet, I don't know. But it's going to be something like that, and it's going to be you talk about the reserve currency. That may well end up being the reserve currency.
I kind of see that as the end game too. I think Bitcoin just passed around $9,093, $9,400. It's actually a larger monetary base than what Russia has. So
right.
Yeah, I think it's in the top 10. I think Russia is number 9, so Bitcoin would be number 8 or something like that. So I see it eating up more value. It's still Bitcoin's only $165 billion right now market cap, but the overall crypto market cap's a lot bigger. I just see it as a real tool. That's one of the reasons I got into it. I wanted to ask you about that. After you left WVU, you went, am I right here, you went and worked for another software company, Paragon Computation.
Yes.
Yes. Has anyone ever mentioned to you how close Paragon and Paragon are?
That's just a coincidence.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's anything to that.
Yeah, a friend of mine started this company, so he's the founder, but I was there from the beginning. I was their CFO. Paragon is they do supercomputation. In fact, you may well have run across them in the news. The thing that they're known for currently is they can take DNA from a crime scene, run it through their supercomputer, and build a picture of the person's face from the DNA. Yeah, they've solved a number of cold cases doing that.
I didn't know that was possible, to be honest with you. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's scary when you think about it. Yeah.
I mean, it's a good thing if you're doing it for the right reasons, right? Yeah. This ties in with blockchain. That was you guys were working on supercomputers, right? So what do you think? Have you looked into Ethereum? Ethereum claims they're going to be the world's supercomputer. They don't really advertise it or whatever as much, brand themselves that way right now. But do you think that decentralized blockchain has a lot of potential to, do things like that?
Yeah, so there's an interesting thing here, because I jumped on the Ethereum bandwagon early because of that. Presumably, there's some you can program. I'm going to mess the words up, right? But you can code the thing somehow.
Right.
You can build contracts that will automate on the Ethereum blockchain.
Smart contracts.
And right. And so in that sense, it's far more versatile than Bitcoin. It has another thing going for itself that I was surprised when I realized this, because prior to realizing it, I would have said the opposite. The thing it has going for itself is that it's not capped like Bitcoin. And the reason I say that has it going for it, so for those who aren't aware, there is in theory a maximum amount of Bitcoin. And once we reach that amount, there is no more. And people look at that as a plus, because your Bitcoin can't be inflated away like we worry about people printing dollars. You can't print more Bitcoin. It is what it is. The downside of that is that people will have a less of a tendency to use it in transactions, because you know that over time it's necessarily going to become more valuable because there's a cap on it. So your tendency will be to hoard it, right? It's like when the mint comes out with a new coin. We come out with a dollar coin, and you never see them in circulation because everybody holds on to them because they think they're going to be worth more in the future, right? So the things never circulate. So too Bitcoin. Ethereum does grow. It grows at a limit, but there's growth over time. And that growth, I submit, makes Ethereum much more likely candidate for a regular usable currency than Bitcoin. So what we may find is that the world moves to a combination of those two, where Ethereum becomes the crypto we use in transactions, and Bitcoin becomes the crypto we use for our savings.
I actually think that you just nailed it there. I agree with you a lot on that we're going to have something like Ethereum as a medium of exchange, and and Bitcoin might emerge. It really already has as more of a store of value. And,
I think that's right.
People don't want to put it into circulation as much.
Yeah.
Because if they do, they're, What? So you've dabbled a little bit in the crypto space. When did you start looking at it?
I started looking at it. Who got me involved in it was a friend of mine, Steve Horowitz. He was, and I don't know whether he was actually invested, but we were having a conversation about it. And I thought, this is stupid. I need to get involved in this. And that was back when it was selling for $200.
Do you have any inclinations on who Satoshi Nakamoto might be? Have you ever looked?
No idea. But I'm just delighted that nobody knows.
It's pretty cool, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. So what have you had any lectures? Have you given any lectures, or has anyone asked you about it at Duquesne?
About Bitcoin? No, I've talked to some students about it who were actually investing in it. So, we would compare, and they would laugh at me because I got out too early. I would laugh at them because they got in, the thing tanked, right? That kind of thing.
They bought the high.
Yeah, right. But I don't know enough to talk about it in, like to give lectures on it or anything. I could just answer the odd question like we're doing now.
Right. What do you have? What's the future for you look like? What are you gonna plan? You plan on teaching for a long time, or what? You seem to like to do some private sector stuff. What's on your table and what your agenda in the future?
Well, I get this 5-year itch. Every 5 years, I get bored with what I'm doing. I want to do something else, right? So about 5 years ago, I started with my colleague James Harrigan a nonprofit. And we go around to high schools giving one-day lectures on economics and government. So we've been all over the country doing this. In fact, I'm going in 2 days to Missouri to do a couple of these. And so we're doing that, and that's become quite successful. And we turned it over last spring to the Foundation for Economic Education. And they're now taking over and expanding it. So that brings me to my next 5-year cycle. And our next 5-year cycle, we just finished a book, James Harrigan and I. It's coming out next month, Cooperation and Coercion, where we talk about how it's a book about economics and government aimed at the interested non-expert. Okay. So we talk about how humans organize themselves by these two principles, cooperation, i.e. markets, and coercion, i.e. government.
I'm going to have to pick up a copy of that and try to have you back on again if you'll come back on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I guess where I would just say is that anybody, I'm going to put all your links in the description of this video. When the book comes out, I'll update it. So yeah, everyone go check that out. But that's all I have for now. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
As long as we're talking about that, check out as well my podcast. James and I have a weekly podcast, Words and Numbers. You can find us at wordsandnumbers.org. We come out every Wednesday with a half-hour episode. We talk about, economics and government.
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention that about the podcast because James is a friend of mine on the internet as well. So, yeah, I've watched a few episodes of that. It's a great podcast. I'll put that link in the description as well. Is there anything else you'd like to mention, or?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
but I'm happy to come on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is I learned a lot tonight. I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
And, yeah, we'll have to do it again. You stick around. I want to say goodbye, but I'm going to close this out, and everyone have a good day.